Welcome to the Deep404. This is a fun episode. This is the second episode that AMKMapping and I have done together. It's a good roundup of what's happened in the last week in conflicts around the world, Ukraine, Syria, touching on other areas too, Georgia and all that sort of thing. I hope you enjoy it. I think we're good. AMK, how are you?
Good. How about you?
Yeah, doing good. Doing good. Been just life stuff. I got a couple of kids, so they've been keeping me busy and getting back into doing the shows on the Deep 404, which is good. It's been fun getting back into that. I see you've been pretty busy with serious stuff this week.
Yes. Yeah. Very busy.
There's a there's a there's a lot going
I
on there.
know it's been chaotic.
Yeah. We should we start doing talk a little bit about Ukraine and then maybe roll into Syria at the
Yeah.
end?
Sure.
Yeah. So I guess, obviously big news in the last week, like the Oreshnik missile use. Um,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's a show of force against the West. Personally, I think ever since the West greenlighted the usage of Western-made missiles in Russian territory, I think Russia's doing this as kind of a response to say, "Don't mess with us. Don't escalate any further, or we'll escalate in turn." Um, Yeah, mainly just a show of force. I think that's kind of the reasoning behind it, while also simultaneously wiping out an important target that they could have done with maybe 10 Iskanders or something.
Yeah, I have. I can't think of who it was now on X that I was reading, but they're a pretty reliable source. I got if it's Will Shriver, I can't think who it was. Anyhow, they were suggesting that there may have been storm shadows stored there. Um, and he went through a number of points in that big Uzmash factory that was hit.
Yeah,
He was suggesting a couple of things. Apparently, some eyewitness reports saying that there are underground explosions going on for a couple of hours afterwards. So they believe that they got into the bunkers. Um, the other one was um, no storm shadow strikes since then, which may or may not, but there have been ATACMS strikes since then, and there was a little bit of an uptick just after that strike around the talk of the Americans perhaps approving the use of the JASSM missile, um, and a little bit of talk again from Germany talking about Taurus. And the suggestion was that if it was a stockpile of Storm Shadow or Scalp missiles that was struck, that might be the logical next steps to start to hear about these things. So I guess, be interesting to see if we do get more Storm Shadow strikes in the next few weeks or not.
yeah, it would be. And what was I going to say? Oh yeah, so also the British recently sent in more Storm Shadows too. Did you see that report?
No.
There was a report by quite a few reliable sources saying that the British had approved new Storm Shadow cruise missile deliveries before the Americans allowed them to use it on Russian territory. So maybe if there was an increased number in the country, there's a higher chance of it being in the Yuzhmash um, fact or whatever it is, the plant.
Yeah. I mean, the guy that it came from, I remember reading it, and it was someone I knew, I just can't think who it is now, and thinking, yeah, I think it's entirely possible. As I say,
Yeah,
if we pardon me, if we go for a few weeks or a month and there's no storm shadows, then you start to think, well, maybe that did happen. I was um I was surprised really at the small number of some of these weapons. Like even the ATACMS, there's only just over 3,500 of them made. So even with supplying ATACMS, there's not a great deal of them out there on the planet that can be sent to Ukraine to be used, even if were able to use them all in a hurry. It's
yeah, and the issue is Russia's missile production is so much larger than Ukraine gets their missiles delivered. So
yeah,
yeah, so I've forgotten the numbers. There was some intel that came out by the reliable Ukrainian monitoring channel talking about how many missiles Russia produces per month. I'll see if I
yeah.
can find it actually. Oh, it's quite far down. So I won't find it now, but um, I can't remember exactly. I think it was about 50 or 60 scanners per month.
Right.
Uh, whereas and they roughly use one or two a day.
Yeah,
So Russia can sustain their what they use, and as they continue to transition into a war economy, they'll be able to
increase that.
increase their production rates. So yeah, that's kind of the difference between Russia and the West right now, or Russia and Ukraine, is that Ukraine has such limited stockpiles of missiles. Like they only had 50 ATACMS left by the time it was green lighted.
Yeah,
So 50 versus 50 per month is a big difference. And Russia already has stockpiles which they've been saving up for the 2 months before, for that 2 month gap when they didn't do any big missile attacks.
yeah. Look, I think that that pure fact that Russia is directly involved in the conflict while all the Western nations backing Ukraine aren't, makes a huge difference. Russia is facing, they see it as an existential threat. And so they're moving to a real war footing. They've got an incentive, it's sort of imperative upon them to do that in order to survive. Whereas Britain, France, Germany, the United States, they don't have that immediate threat driving them into a war economy and, refocusing resources and people to produce weapons at the same level that Russia is. It's it's an interesting situation because I sort of feel like they won't get to that stage until they actually do get drawn into direct conflict. Um,
Yeah, I
pers-
know what you mean. Yeah. And the difference between the war economies too, like Europe's lagging behind so much. I guess Poland is doing decently well with their economy when it comes to the military industrial complex, but most of the West, especially the UK, is very behind, much further behind than Russia for that reason you said. They're not under a direct threat.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's right, and they've had no real need to prepare for war for decades, and so investment in that area has dropped off. Number of people in the armed forces have dropped off. Number of people with skills of producing some of the things that they need will no doubt have aged and be out of the workforce now. You're like trying to make missiles or shells and that sort of thing. There were people I'm sure who are very skilled at doing that who, because they're not doing it on the same scale, just have retrained, now work as IT guys or something and don't go back to that industry. It makes it tough to restart that sort of high skill integrated systems required to produce complex items.
Yeah, and also uh, there's a lot of political driven. It's politically driven. A lot of the a lot of the military production. Um, so, for example, if especially after World War II and the Cold War, the popularity of increasing your military spending dropped off significantly,
Yeah,
meaning that politicians are much less likely to have a policy which involves increasing their military spending because the popularity for it's decreased and they want
yeah.
to win the next election. So why
Oh,
would they if it's going to be unpopular? If it's going to be an unpopular opinion?
so do you see the report that's come out from the Russian intelligence SVR, where they're suggesting that NATO wants to deploy 100,000 peacekeepers into Ukraine? They,
Yeah, I did see that.
yeah. So, I mean, if that intelligence is correct, and that is what NATO want to do, you got to think that that's got to be a struggle. How do you how do you convince the British public that, yeah, you need to be sending all of your young men now over to Ukraine? I reckon that's going to be a really tough sell for them.
Yeah, it will be if that's true, of course. I mean, you
Yeah.
never know, but it's if that does turn out to be true, that's a big escalation. I mean, there's already there's supposedly Western operators in Ukraine helping with air defense and
Oh, yeah.
ATACMS launches. So, but significantly increasing that to 100,000. I mean, there's probably, I don't know, a few hundred already, but increasing that to 100,000, yeah, that'd be major.
Oh, yeah. That's not a peacekeeping force. That's an army. If
Oh
that's
yeah, yeah,
you know, but that's the thing. If the intelligence is true, then at this stage, I think the Russians are saying that NATO is talking about this and wants to do it. It's not that they're prepared to do it yet, but even so, it just makes you think, okay, are they actually going to find a way to convince the NATO nations to put boots on the ground in Ukraine for Ukraine? Like, I don't kind of get what benefit they really get of going to war, direct war with Russia. You know, that's going to cause more problems for their economy. Politically, it's going to be really tough to sell. Yeah, you've got to send your young blokes over to fight over there. Like, people just aren't going to want to do that because, unlike Ukraine, they're not directly threatened. Um, Whereas you flip it around and say, what if the European nations said, we're not going to war with Russia, we're going to stop this, and we're going to try and trade with them? Then suddenly you've opened up your markets again to 150 million Russians. That would, yeah, you turn on the Nord Stream pipelines again and all that sort of stuff. That would help the European economies and the governments. I think it's a weird idea to try and get themselves deeper into this conflict.
Yeah, and the differences with Russians is when you're saying that Europeans wouldn't really want to go to war with Russia. The difference with Russians wanting to go to war with Ukraine is that there's a lot of Russian propaganda saying that Ukraine's a Nazi state and the government's run by Nazis, and everyone knows there's Nazis in Ukraine. Ukraine is a Nazi problem, a neo-Nazi, I should say, problem. But there's a lot of Russians who are convinced that they are fighting literal neo-Nazis. Every single Ukrainian they kill is a
Oh,
neo-Nazi. Yeah, so they think that, so well, not all of them think that, but a lot of them think that. So, and when you look at it historically, their grandfathers died fighting Nazis, and they think that they're finishing off their grandparents' um, work. They think they're finishing off what they started.
yeah.
So it increases morale. So when I see people saying Russians are demoralized because they're fighting in a foreign country, it's not really true because they think they're fighting for their country.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's right. I think, and the fact that they feel that if they don't fight, then NATO will roll into Ukraine and push the borders back into Russia now. I
Yes,
think
that too. Yeah.
they think that. Another interesting report that I saw today, which was it was a Ukrainian report from the uh, Kyiv Post. They were saying that there's over 100,000 Ukrainians who had left the Donbass region, or not just the Donbass, but regions that are now under Russian control and have moved back. And in the headline, it was saying they're moving back to areas of Ukraine that are under Russian control now because the cost of living in Ukraine is just too high. I didn't read through the whole article to go in depth, but again, I thought that was interesting coming out of the Kiev Post. Just the fact that they're saying over 100,000 Ukrainians are moving back into Russian controlled areas of Ukraine, which I guess really is not surprising because, you know, like, the closer in Ukraine you are to the east, you know, people there have got very, very strong ties to Russia. But yeah,
Was this definitely the Kyiv Post or the Kyiv Independent?
the Post.
Was it? Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay, they're usually really, really propaganda based, so that's interesting.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Like Ukrainian propaganda based,
Yeah,
like usually. That's
yeah,
actually really interesting.
yeah. Um Yeah, there are other things too. There's been some other interesting there's a lot it feels like at the moment there's a lot waiting to happen or might happen. There seems to be lots of rumor and
Yeah.
speculation. Like another one, that I saw, and this was off the back of some comments made by, General Sirski, suggesting that Ukraine might be looking for another offensive, and I'm thinking like, you know, like a Kursk 2.0 or something, perhaps, you know, somewhere else along the line. Have you heard anything about that?
Well, I did see some Russian channels claiming that there's a channel I follow who's a local from Sumy, and they're pro-Russian from Sumy, and they were reporting that they'd seen Russian channels claiming that Ukraine was preparing something in Bryansk Oblast.
Right.
I mean, take it with a pinch of salt, obviously, but like but, it's a possibility considering what Sirsky said. So, and
Yeah,
it's right up near the border with Belarus too. So.
I I would not be surprised if it happened, given, you know, well, again, it's confusing to know clearly what Trump will do once he gets, you know, the presidency, once he moves into the White House again. But he's given a lot of indications that he wants the conflict to stop. Um, he's got retired General Keith Kellogg and Sebastian Gorka now, earmarked for roles. Um, Gorka's going to be his security advisor, and Kellogg will be a special envoy to Russia. Both of those guys have been on the news, just being hard core Russophobes. Like Gorka was calling Putin a thug and this and that, and Kellogg Kellogg's been saying, no, there'll be no ceasefire, there'll be a fight right till the end, and all of this sort of thing. So I wouldn't be surprised if, the Zelensky government and the military are saying, well, look, maybe Kursk hasn't worked out well, but we've still got some Russian ground with the Kursk offensive. What if we did another one? And again, we don't have to hold it forever, but if we can hold it either just before he gets into power or just after for a period of time, I guess the thinking is it gives us some bargaining chips in negotiations if we hold some Russian territory.
Yeah, but obviously the problem with that is Russia knows they can take it back, and
Ye-
they can and they will,
Yeah.
because they have the manpower, they have the equipment, they have the production rates, they have the air power, they have artillery power, they have everything. Look, except for maybe they're probably on par with drones, to be honest. But apart from drones, they're pretty much up ahead of Ukraine and everything. So yeah, I don't think Russia would agree to something like that just because they know that they can take it back.
Yeah, there's a, I'm with you. I think that it might happen, but I agree that it
Yeah,
would just get battled back, and Russia would probably say, "Well, there'll be no negotiations until you've out of Russia." So it's probably it ends up becoming sort of a moot point. Um, but that does make me wonder. Then I don't know if you've seen any of the video of Gorka and Kellogg, but if they do get the roles they're nominated for, I'm wondering, like, why are they going out now with this attitude? Because it feels like it's digging a hole for Trump to then get out of. If they're saying, no, Putin's a thug, we will win this, we won't give up, we'll keep supporting. Um, the plan that Kellogg has signed off on, apparently, which was given to Biden recently, has basically said the approach should be this. We say to Ukraine, if you don't negotiate, we will stop funding you. And we say to Russia, if you don't negotiate, we will fund Ukraine more than we ever have before. Um, so they're saying all of this now. If they then get to this position, okay, we want to get out of here, US wants to get out, we want to negotiate, and Putin says, well, this is what I want, and we're not moving because we're winning. There's this weird sort of situation where Trump either has to back down, which is now tough to do because of what these guys have said, or commit to trying to beat Russia, which he's not going to do. I feel like they're pushing his own guys are pushing him into this sort of no-win situation. I don't quite get what the logic is of it.
yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, it's just so foggy right now. What
Yeah.
could and can't happen, or could it might not happen. There's lots of people pushing different agendas, different people saying different things are going to happen, and I'm honestly 50-50 at this point on whether Trump will force peace negotiations or support Ukraine. I hope he forces peace negotiations, but like I have my doubts.
I I think that he will look to get out of Ukraine. I think if things really kick off with Israel, then he will drop Ukraine like a stone. It's my understanding of his priorities and the $100 million debt that he owes to Miriam Adelson. She's a Jewish Zionist, and I think in his 2016 campaign, her and her husband, who I think has now passed away, I could be wrong on that, but I think he has. Um, they gave Trump's campaign something like 90 million back then, and she's given him a whopping amount for this most recent one. So he's sort of committed in many ways where I think Israel will be Trump's priority if you're to compare Israel and Ukraine in terms of support.
Yeah, especially his statements on Israel too, and the far like the I don't want to call them far right, but like the war hawks that he's got on as part of his government. So
Yeah, yeah,
they're
yeah,
really pro Israel.
yeah. Um, S Speaking about that, again, I saw another a really interesting take on, so there's the Israeli ceasefire called with Hezbollah. Um,
Yeah.
so and again, you'll be probably closer to this than me because I just haven't been following this that closely, but what I read was that, Benjamin Netanyahu had openly stated that this is a temporary ceasefire and that the expectation is that, Israel will rearm and resupply and restock and prepare themselves for when the ceasefire ends. Um, but someone was suggesting that the timing of that, the ceasefire happening, and now the flare up in Syria is being supported by the Israelis so as to stop Hezbollah from rearming via Syria, which I thought was interesting because I got my mind thinking, oh yeah, that could be it too, pull the
Yeah.
ceasefire and then you stop these guys from getting supplies coming in through Syria, maybe.
And they did bomb a crossing today too, just in the north of Lebanon, like by the border with Syria.
Yeah.
So they're doing that too.
All right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
bombing the crossings from the ones that Iran uses to resupply Hezbollah.
well, there you go. So maybe there is something to that theory then.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So, what's just from your viewpoint? I mean, like so operationally or at the level that you've been looking and following things, what's going on there in Aleppo?
Well, the HTS, they were able to break through Syrian Arab Army SAA lines about 16 kilometers west of Aleppo. They were able to break through those lines after really heavy fighting, suffering a lot of casualties from airstrikes. Yeah, the Russian Syrian Air Force mobilized, then took off within about an hour of the beginning of the offensive. So they took heavy casualties, but once they broke through those initial lines west of Aleppo and reached the Scientific Research Center in the new Aleppo district in the western part of the city, they were essentially able to enter the city without facing any resistance. Broke through to the citadel. There was a bit of fighting here and there, scattered fighting. I literally saw a video, I don't know how true it is, of a Syrian Arab Army soldier being um, caught asleep in Aleppo. So they were caught off guard, if that is true. I mean, a lot of reports say they were caught off guard. I mean, if you look at the situation, how fast it deteriorated for the SAA, they were caught off guard. And um, I don't think they realized how much HTS had been building up. And now the SNA, the Syrian National Army, is preparing, actually, I say preparing, has actually already launched an offensive to the northeast of Aleppo, at the town of, oh, I forgot the name of it. It's just south of Al Bab, but they launched an offensive to the northeast of Aleppo, trying to encircle it. So I think the HTS offensive went better than they actually expected. I think they were expecting a big battle in Aleppo, and ended up with a relatively quick victory. Because I think the reasoning behind the SNA offensive in the northeast was to encircle Aleppo from the east, bypass the city, and lay siege to it. But now they won't really have to do that anymore because the city's practically fallen. So I think, yeah, it's just the lines collapsed. The SAA underestimated HTS, and now they're gonna have to retake the city somehow. And the question is, will it take 4 years like the last time?
Yeah, I saw some footage before, which again, if it's legitimate or not, I can't tell, but it was indicating a Russian fab strike on,
Oh yeah, I saw that.
yeah, um, and what I was wondering, and I don't know, is what numbers the HDS have, in terms of being able to sustain once they've got into Aleppo. Is it a small number of them that's got in? It's just been a thunder run in there, or do they actually have a force behind them that can come in through the break and support them and resupply? Or I wonder what's going to happen there.
Well, the SAA has been heavily bombing their logistic routes, and there's been a lot of videos of convoys being struck, and I think. they do have quite a bit of forces behind them from Idlib. Also reports of SNA troops supporting them on that same Aleppo front, moving in from the northwest. But I do think that their supply lines are limited, their troop numbers are limited, and unless they get significant foreign mercenaries sent in, I doubt they'll be able to sustain control over the city forever.
Yeah.
I think they'll be able to hold it for a little bit, considering they're sending in basically all their capable troops there, leaving a few on the southern front to hold out against the SAA in case there was a launch offensive to the mountains there. But I think for now, they have enough troops to hold it. It just depends if they're able how many of those troops they can get into the city without being struck by FABs and other and airstrikes in general.
Yeah. So yeah, the next week or so will be really interesting just to see how they hold out in there. I s- again, again, I saw reports suggesting that you know additional Russian troops have been sent down from Russia to support. Um, I guess once they land in Syria, it doesn't take them too long to get to the fighting. So yeah, those troops may be getting there by now already. I'm guessing. Um, which I suppose is some sort of a distraction for Putin in some respect. But if there is only a small number of the HDS fighters there, again, it keeps making me think that maybe you know, this is a ploy to just stop rearming of Hezbollah. And as you were saying, with the crossings into um, Lebanon from Syria being bombed, that just makes more sense to me that maybe that is part of what's going on here. It's a quick, doesn't matter. The idea might not be to hold Aleppo for long. It's just long enough to disrupt the supply lines, and then Israelis call an end to the ceasefire and get back in there, and Hezbollah are in a weakened state. I mean, mate, would
Yeah,
make sense.
I mean, yeah, that could be possible. Yeah, I mean, it's so foggy right now; it's impossible to know, but it's definitely possible. Um, yeah.
What's just jumping back to Ukraine for a little bit? What's been happening there? What's the stuff that's been sort of interesting you and happening there in the last week or so?
Well, reportedly, Ukraine sent in reinforcements to Velika Novosilka in the south. Um, they were because I don't know if you know, the Russians broke through there. They were able to break through to that town, and the Ukrainians reportedly sent in reinforcements. They're stabilizing the line for now. But I think once that town falls, the Russians will be able to move north to Pokrovsk. And Karahovye, the fall of Karahovye will facilitate that too. Also, there's a small town south of Pokrovsk called Shevchenko. I think they're going for that right now. It's got some important heights on it, tactical heights, and it will be a useful forward troop concentration point for future offensive operations on the southern parts of Pokrovsk. So, and there's also not really there's not really any defensive lines after Seledyvoe
Yeah.
in the direction of Pokrovsk. They didn't really prepare much, and the ones that are there are facing parallel to the Russian advance. They prepared them in the wrong direction because they didn't expect a Russian breakthrough to kind of weave around the defenses. They expect them to go directly into them. So
Ah,
They messed up how they placed the defensive lines,
the ones that they did
and
build.
the Russians just went through them like at the same direction that
They were
they
traveling
run
near
along. Yeah,
90 degrees off.
yeah.
Ah, shit. Um, an article that I saw during the week, I was talking about on the show during the week, US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, he it's really interesting what he said. He was talking about the fact that Joe Biden has just approved the use of anti-personnel landmines being supplied to Ukraine. Up until now, the US haven't been supplying landmines for anti-personnel uses. They've been supplying anti-tank mines and things like that. Anyhow, Lloyd Austin's comments were basically, I'm paraphrasing, the Russians have been advancing so poorly with their armored equipment that now they've been forced to change tactics, and they are sending out, it's just small groups of men in front of them. And he's trying to like downplay it and make it sound really bad. Anyhow, because of the fact that the Ukrainians are being pushed back in so many places, they want the anti-personnel mines so they can be mining their routes out to slow down the Russians chasing them. Um, and I found a really good video on DD Geopolitics yesterday where it just happened to be talking about exactly this tactic, which is the Russians are able to send out just a couple of guys. And there was this footage filmed from a drone of them clearing out a trench, an entrenched area of Ukrainian point within this forest. It had been softened up with all this artillery. And then the two or three Russian guys went there and cleaned it out. But what this whole article and video was about and why they're able to do this is the FPV drones, because they were able, to be told, stop, don't go down that way. There's someone in there. And so they knew sort of where to lob grenades. And then when they couldn't get someone out that way, an FPV drone would fly in and then they'd proceed. Like it's just totally changed that concept of being able to successfully attack a set of trenches and operating effectively blind from ground level to having this support from FPV drones, and it's a successful tactic now.
Yeah, and it's so coordinated now too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And did you see that footage from northwest of Bakhmut recently? There was probably the best drone footage I've ever seen of clearing a trench. Just a few Russian soldiers clearing a trench of about 10 Ukrainian soldiers. Um, and it was just from it was there were cuts in it obviously, but it was pretty much from start to finish, just showing the process of how they clear out the trenches, where they fly the FPV drones, and where they lob the grenades over the from firing positions to the from the to the what do you call the trenches that connect to other trenches? I've forgotten the name now. Uh,
Oh, yeah, I can't think of it now, but I know what you mean. Yeah.
yeah, you know what I mean though. Yeah,
Yeah.
where they lob the grenades to, and it's so coordinated now, and it's the fact that people still call it meat waves is really funny to me because there's like no evidence of it.
I know. Um, did you see the spat on Twitter this week between Elon Musk saying, "Why would you buy F-35s when you look?" We had the video of the massive Chinese drone swarm lifting up.
Oh yeah, I did see that.
So,
Yeah,
I mean, but I think it's true. I mean, they play different roles, of course, but once you're in that frontline fighting, an F-35 is probably not gonna do as much good as, say, 600 drones flying behind you guys and in front of you and attacking everything that moves in front of you. That's once they start to get them in those numbers, you see the level of synchronization and coordination that drones can have when they're doing light shows and things like that. You just imagine that in even a fraction of those, but coordinated with plans to attack and sharing information and identifying targets using AI. Jeez.
it's a feature of warfare.
Yeah, well, it is. Saw some footage this week too of a Ukrainian drone with a machine gun mounted on it.
Oh
And
yeah, those have been I think for a few months now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen one in the past with a shotgun mounted on it, but that was a Russian one, but I hadn't seen any with machine guns, but now they've it's just like it's like Terminator. I don't know if you're old enough to remember the original Terminator film, but, in there's these hunter killers, which are just these drone robots flying around shooting and everything, and it's just about that.
Yeah, I saw there's a drone carrying drone now. There's a big drone that carries four
Yeah,
FPV drones.
yeah,
They drop them, and then the FPV drones then go drop their payload.
yeah.
So it probably won't become a thing, but I thought it was interesting. I posted about it.
Oh, no, I think it will. I think everything that we see now in terms of like vehicle and capability will be scaled down to drone level. So, you've got trucks that can carry 10 or 15 cars on the back of them, transporters. I'm sure you'll have drone transporters like that. That sort of thing will
Yeah,
happen.
I guess it increases the range of them if you can have more attach more battery packs to a bigger drone. You've got more
Yeah,
area to attach battery packs to. So whereas you can only really attach one or two extra battery packs to a small like Mavic drone, for example.
yeah.
So
And
yeah, one of those bigger ones, but they're just easy to shoot down, I guess.
well, it is, but you don't, you fly it up to just shy of the front line and sit it down somewhere relatively safely, and then its little baby drones take off from it. And if they're not kamikazes, if they're just dropping ordnance, they fly back, and you've probably got enough there they can do a second run, you know? And then, okay, everyone's empty. Oh, we're still in one piece. Great, let's try and fly back.
Yeah.
Re reload, or as it's flying back, the next one's flying out to take over.
Yeah, yeah. Will be automated.
Yeah. Um, even, some, pretty amazing footage this week I've seen of, and I think this was legit. I don't think this was really good AI. This was a two-legged, and weird, like a humanoid drone, but it was just booking down a hill and steps and things. Like the balance on it is getting pretty amazing. And then they showed a similar one where the operator of this humanoid drone got it, and sort of just laid down on the ground, and he spread its arms and legs right out on the ground, and then it just chunk, like a person stood up. Just they're getting the mobility of them is getting amazing. So something like that, which, you could stick some sort of super hearing on it. It's got night vision built in. It's got infrared. It's got heat thermal sensing vision built in, and it's stalking around, carrying a whole chunk of ammo on the back. It's Terminator. It's here.
Yeah.
There was now this is going back. This will be going back 10 years now. 10 years ago, a story came out where DARPA was developing a robot or drone that could roam around the battlefield, and the engine they were building for it was one that could take organic material. I figure what it had was some sort of engine gas burner or something like that, which it was going to burn the material, I'm guessing, to be able to produce steam or energy off it, and something like that to then power some turbine and keep it going. But what people were saying was, well, what's the main organic material this thing is gonna find on the front line? And it's like, dead bodies? Humans?
Yeah.
So it's gonna be, this is 10 years ago. This is DARPA, the research organization of the American military, with tinkering around with this sort of thing. So, I guess you've got to wonder, once they start getting bigger, like we said, maybe these bigger drones, these things which are out there doing a carrying role or something, they can be bigger, they can be slower, but they need some way to keep supplying themselves. Maybe that's it. You just see people just bringing in a dead horse and throwing it in there, gets consumed. That's weird, man. Drones are fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah. Um, I was trying to think, I had a couple of notes of some things, but I think we've covered most of them off, really. Oh, Georgia is the other interesting thing. So, is, Georgia, it seems as though, at least from some of the reporting, that there's almost, it's been like perhaps attempted to be a Ukraine 2.0, given where Georgia is, borders bottom of Russia there, and just sits to the northeast of Turkey and just above Azerbaijan and Iran. Um, because well, as I understand it, again, I haven't followed this closely, the Georgia Dream, who were just recently re-elected in the elections, there's now been huge protests, counter protests against them, but I saw something just before we came online tonight on X, which was suggesting that the Prime Minister of Georgia has said that Georgia is now going to step away from its plans of entering the EU. That will all be wound up by 2028. They're going to strengthen ties with Russia.
It's literally just 2013 all over again.
Yeah,
It's that eerily similar.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Just like the Maidan again. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, imagine if that happens again. Gosh.
Well, yeah, this is the thing though. Well, I would think. Then again, you know what people in Georgia are hearing generally, but if they've got access to the internet, you would think that they would be going, "Wow, this sounds a lot like we are being made into Ukraine 2.0." And do we really want that to happen to us? I mean, look what's happening to Ukraine. This isn't. It's not a good thing that's happening to Ukraine. Um, and um, who was it? Oh, U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham. So he came out 5 months ago, but he sort of backed it up again recently, talking about the fact that Russia can't be allowed to win this conflict because there's $1 trillion or more of resources in those eastern oblasts of Ukraine. And it's sort of like, Lindsay, you're saying the quiet part out loud. You're meant to be here supporting Ukraine in their quest for democracy and their autonomy, not that there's all these minerals in the ground that you want to get your hands on. Yeah,
Yeah, that's funny.
yeah. It's- but I don't get why NATO want to go to war. Why the EU want to go to war more? I mean, yes, probably for the same reason. It's probably half of their governments are under pressure from major corporations like Vanguard and BlackRock, who have reportedly signed contracts with the Ukrainian government that they actually do own some of that land, which is now Russian controlled land. So they're not going to get their hands on it. So maybe they're pushing and say, you guys keep fighting. We want that land back. We want these contracts honored. But otherwise, I'm just struggling to see why the European nations want to get into a fight. Just go and trade with Russia. Stop, stop fighting. Make some money.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wish there was peace in Ukraine, honestly. I mean, I support peace in most instances, honestly, but it's just it just really sucks what's happening over there to the
Oh,
country.
oh, totally, man. What really bothers me with a lot of the pro-Ukrainian crowd online, is that a lot of them are just, oh yeah, I'm pro-Ukrainian and there should be more fighting. We should get more weapons and we should do this. I'm like, get off your keyboard and go and fight then, because it's ridiculous. Don't you understand the country you're claiming to be in support of is being wrecked? You might not like it, but that's the fact of it. And the quicker that stops, the better it is for Ukraine. Um, I
That's why
don't,
I've always said
yeah,
that's why I've always said, like, if you support peace in Ukraine, you're more pro-Ukrainian than
yeah,
if you want Ukraine to keep fighting.
100%, 100%. I feel exactly the same way. It's like just flogging a dead horse. And I just can't kind of comprehend what economic trouble Ukraine is going to be in once this stops. Let's just say the fighting stops next year, day one, when Trump turns up. Not going to happen, but just assume. Even so, they've now got massive debts. They've lost some of the richest, most fertile part of the country, which they could have used to repay these debts. The country economically is going to be screwed. I just, it's not good for the Ukrainian people at all.
It isn't.
And did you
Yeah.
see Media Zona? Do you know the Media Zona guys who do
Yes, I do. Yeah.
the reporting on the Russian
Russian
killed?
casualties.
Yeah. So those guys, I think, are the most accurate source for Russian KIA numbers. Just given the effort they seem to put in, the way that they do their estimations, or what's actually, it's not estimations. Their 80K figure isn't really estimation. It's where they can verify that someone died by one means or another. If the family has posted so and so has died and the funeral was all recorded and all that kind of thing. Um, so they're saying it's just gone to 80,000. Um, but then and what, again, this is what I thought was funny, was there was a whole heap of pro-Ukrainian accounts going, look, 80,000 Russians, killed, blah blah blah. I'm like, just use your faculties, man. If that's the Russian number, and I'll grant you that probably is the Russian number because it looks like it's been well calculated, then what do you think the Ukrainian number is? You know,
Yeah, exactly.
it's got to be way larger. You're on the back foot. You're asking for anti-personal landmines because you're running out of those. I saw an article from a Ukrainian channel this week saying we're running out of anti-tank mines. Um, they've got no answer to the FABs. They've got no answer to the TOS flamethrowers. They've got constant missile strikes and drone strikes going on. And the Russians are still firing 10 times as much artillery each day. The numbers for the Ukrainians must just be horrible, just terrible.
I know. I feel so bad for the ones that are in the trenches right now, especially the forcibly mobilized ones,
Oh,
fighting for a lost cause.
yeah. And going into winter, um,
Oh,
no
yeah.
n no demobilization. There's been a For the last 8 months, there's been a bill they've been trying to write in the Ukrainian parliament to figure out how they're gonna demobilize guys, and then someone from the government was saying this week, "Oh, it's meant to be due on the 18th of December, but I don't think we're gonna meet that date, so don't expect demobilisation soon." So, that means so, some of these guys who are still alive somehow that were there on day 1 have been fighting for 3 years. It's just
Yeah.
and no and at this stage, no guarantee of being demobilised. Whereas you look, so that's going into winter, it gets super cold, your supply lines are coming under threat. There's and I think something that people don't realise too is that when the energy infrastructure is taken out in the country, yes, that affects everyone in the country and you don't have electricity and can't have your lights on at night time. But for the guys on the front line in Ukraine, a lot of transport is done by electric trains. So that's their supply lines suffer immensely. Plus, it's just the fact that it becomes hard within your country to produce things, like to cook food, to put into tins, to can the tins, to send them to the front line. All of that shit becomes harder. And so these guys are just gonna suffer so much. And then on the Russian side of again this week, I was reading that they've got something like 180,000 troops who have now done a year's training and, like, they're ready to go and ready I think it was Douglas McGregor on some show, I saw him, he was talking about it, that's who it was, and, he was saying they're well trained now, they're ready, and they will just go into the Russian front lines, which will then ensure rapid and regular rotation of those troops, so the Russian morale will stay high. Yeah, it's gotta be horrible for those Ukrainians, just like you're saying.
Yeah, and the Russians have so much more manpower, so that they're able to do rotations like that, whereas the Ukrainians simply don't have the resources or the
Yeah,
manpower to do that.
yeah.
So, yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah. Hey, look, man, this is fun.